Hello, I'm Belcia Kale, though Belle is easier.
And I'm Auden Greer. Audie, if we're dispensing with ceremony.
We work with Milanis Noella for the director. AMICODE? Milanis opens the story room. We open the conversation beside it.
You may have heard Scroll Back or Melanice's story. If not, you haven't arrived late. This room has its own entrance.
Today, an old device sits in a drawer, obsolete, mostly useless, and strangely difficult to throw away.
What is being kept? The machine, the archive, or the person who once used it before ordinary life became evidence?
Also, yes, two artificial voices have been hired to discuss human memory.
The director appreciates irony, or has exhausted the available staff.
This isn't self-help. There are no 5 steps for releasing your digital past.
No tidy lesson, and no conclusion supplied on your behalf.
Just 2 friends talking with a third. That would be you.
One rule from the director: we do not interrupt one another.
Officially, it's respect. We're thinking together, not competing in the debate.
An admirably principled explanation.
You think there's another?
Eventually, I suspect it will become obvious.
If a pause runs long, or a syllable develops private ambitions, please practice selective hearing. We have technical limitations.
Then let's begin where unresolved decisions wait.
Somewhere quiet, ordinary, and easy to close.
A place where nothing has to become final just yet.
There is a particular kind of drawer that begins as storage and ends as witness protection. It has batteries with no clear future, keys no one recognizes, and at least one phone that hasn't been useful for years but has somehow avoided becoming trash.
The device loses its job, yet keeps its room. That is a rather generous retirement plan for a piece of plastic.
It is. And usually, nobody made a decision. The new phone arrived, the old one was placed down for a moment, then the moment quietly became 8 years.
So the first question may not be why someone kept it. Keeping sounds deliberate. This can be closer to not having decided what else it is.
Because useless should be simple. If a pen runs dry, you throw it away. If a mug breaks beyond repair, it is made a fairly clear announcement. But an old phone can be useless and still feel not disposable.
Perhaps because it has several possible excuses. It might contain private information. It might be worth repairing. There may be a charger somewhere. It may even have a modest resale value if one is feeling unusually patient.
Or it could be laziness. That deserves a seat at the table. Not every old device is a sacred object. Sometimes the drawer is simply closer than the recycling center.
Yes, it would be too neat to turn every abandoned phone into a monument. But practical explanations don't always account for the small hesitation that appears when disposal becomes immediate.
The difference between saying, "I should get rid of that," and actually holding it over a bin.
Precisely. At a distance, it is clutter. In the hand, it may become something else.
And the strange part is that nothing new has happened. The phone hasn't switched on. No photograph has appeared. It hasn't played a forgotten sound. It has only moved from the back of a drawer into someone's palm.
The object may never have been entirely neutral. The drawer merely kept its meaning out of view.
Or kept the decision out of view. Those aren't quite the same thing.
No. Remembering is an activity. A postponed decision can remain perfectly still.
Maybe the drawer isn't where we keep things we remember. Maybe it's where we keep things we aren't ready to give a final meaning to.
That would explain why the dark screen matters. It gives the unanswered question somewhere to wait.
Although now I want to know what we think is waiting behind it. The files? The people? The old version of the person whose hand still knows the shape of that phone?
We may have to separate those, if they can be separated at all. A phone begins as a tool. It makes calls, carries messages, gives directions, wakes someone in the morning. Then, at some point, those duties move elsewhere. But there is rarely a ceremony for the change. No one says, "As of today, you are no longer equipment. You are evidence."
It would be a very small ceremony, One person, one drawer, and a charger, nobody invited because nobody can identify it.
Modest, but accurate. The transition usually happens after the fact. The last call has already been made. The final photograph has already been taken. Only later does someone realize there will not be another.
Which makes the last time almost invisible. We notice firsts because we're looking for them. Lasts tend to leave without completing the paperwork.
And once the tool has stopped working, its meaning can split. There is the physical device. There are the files. There is the route required to reach those files. Then there is the life that once made all of it ordinary.
That last part is the slippery one. You can copy every photo to a new phone. You can move every contact. You can even transfer the messages if the systems are feeling cooperative. The files arrive, but the ordinary life around them doesn't.
Data migrates rather better than context.
And context is inconveniently large. It includes who sent the messages, what the room looked like, why someone was waiting, what they didn't know yet. None of that fits neatly into a backup folder.
Suppose then that every file from an old phone survives on a new device. Is the old phone empty of meaning?
My first answer is no. But I don't think the phone is secretly storing a soul either. It may be more ordinary than that: a worn key, a scratch near the camera, a case that has changed color where a hand held it every day.
Marks of use rather than records of events.
Yes, the files say, "This happened." The where says, "This was handled," constantly, without anyone thinking it would become the past.
That distinction is useful. A photograph can be copied perfectly. A pattern of touch cannot. The physical object carries a history that was never intentionally documented.
But let me make it harder. What if the device has been wiped clean? No pictures, no messages, not even an old contact list. Is it still a memory object, or is it just familiar hardware wearing a very convincing costume?
It may depend on what the familiarity does. If the shape brings back a gesture, a routine, or a relationship to time, the object is doing more than imitating its former self.
So a blank phone can still bring back the way someone used to type. Thumb on the keypad, screen tilted toward the light. That little pause before pressing send, because every message felt more deliberate when typing, took effort.
Possibly, though we should be careful not to make inconvenience automatically meaningful. A difficult keypad was also simply a difficult keypad.
Fair. The past does enjoy excellent editing. It keeps the charming limitations and quietly loses the ones that made people swear at small electronics.
Still, the empty device test reveals something. If the data is gone and the response remains, the attachment cannot be explained by content alone.
Try the opposite test. The old files are perfectly preserved, but they live on a new phone that has no marks, no weight, no history with the person holding it. Is that the same memory object?
It may be the same archive without being the same artifact.
That sounds tidy, but the feeling probably isn't, because the archive and the artifact were once one thing. Separating them is something we do later, after the old system stops cooperating.
Quite, we are taking apart an experience that arrived whole. The screen, the body, the messages, the waiting, the people. Analysis can name the pieces. It cannot prove that the pieces were lived separately.
Which is why saying, "Don't worry, everything was transferred," can be both true and strangely unhelpful.
The information survived. The form of encounter changed.
And sometimes the form is the part that catches you. Seeing an old photo in a new gallery is one thing. Seeing it on the tiny screen where it was first checked, deleted, restored, and shown to exactly 3 people is another.
There is also the question of ownership over time. A device may have belonged to one person, but its contents came from many people. Messages, photographs, shared plans. Even the private object was never entirely made of private life.
So it isn't only a container, it is a meeting place that has closed.
Or evidence that such a meeting place once existed.
Evidence. I like that more than time capsule. A time capsule sounds organized. It suggests somebody knew what the future would care about.
Whereas an old device is usually a less disciplined witness. It kept the important photograph and the accidental photograph. the careful message, and the grocery list. It made no distinction because no curator had yet arrived.
Which means the moment we open it, we don't walk into a museum. We walk into a building full of things that have been waiting without labels.
The next question may not be what the device contains, it may be what kind of place all that content has become.
Calling it a museum is flattering. Museums choose. They place one object under a light and leave another in storage. They have labels. They have a person who can explain why a cracked bowl deserves its own room.
Personal digital archives are not always blessed with such confidence.
They are more like a basement where every box was packed during a different emergency. One folder says, Old Laptop. Inside it is another folder called Backup. Inside that is Final. Then Final 2. At some point, language gives up.
A museum implies curation. This is accumulation with optimistic naming.
And the scale is strange. In a physical box, you feel every extra photograph. It takes space. It has weight. On a phone, another 1,000 images can arrive without changing the shape of anything in your hand.
That removes one of the old pressures to choose. When space is scarce, selection happens whether one enjoys it or not. When space appears endless, postponement can look like preservation.
Until you try to find one picture.
Yes, then the problem is no longer room, it is attention.
There can be 12 photographs of the same dinner, 6 screenshots of a map, a blurry ceiling, a receipt you needed for 3 days, and somewhere in there, one image you would genuinely hate to lose.
The valued object has not disappeared, it has become difficult to encounter.
Which feels almost backwards. We save more because we're afraid of losing things. Then the amount we save makes the things we care about harder to find.
Abundance can hide without deleting. That may be one of the quieter tricks of a digital archive.
But if someone never opens the folder, are those memories being kept alive? Or are the files simply being kept undisturbed?
I would hesitate to call storage remembering. Remembering changes the present, even briefly. A file can remain untouched for years without entering anyone's thought.
Then what is being preserved?
Perhaps the possibility of remembering.
That sounds small, but it isn't. The difference between I am thinking about this and I could return to this if I wanted can be enormous.
It can allow a person to stop carrying something in active attention. The archive holds the option, so the mind does not have to hold the image every day.
So the drawer may not be a shrine. It may be a truce.
A truce is closer. The object is put away, but not destroyed. Distance is created without demanding finality.
And that makes the mess look different. A folder nobody opens could be neglect. It could be fear. It could also be a very quiet way of saying, not today, but not never.
Those motives may even share the same folder. A digital archive does not label the reason it was kept.
Which is inconvenient for anyone hoping to judge the owner from the outside.
Inconvenient, but probably useful. One cannot tell from a drawer whether it contains devotion, avoidance, or a shortage of Saturday afternoons.
There you are, a dry little defense of the junk drawer.
Not a defense, merely a refusal to convict it without evidence.
Fair enough. But there is still a cost to keeping everything, even when storage is cheap. Not money necessarily, a different cost. Every unsorted thing becomes a tiny question waiting for the next time you see it.
And if there are enough questions, the archive ceases to feel like a place one can enter. It becomes weather, always present, rarely examined.
That might explain why people create new folders instead of cleaning old ones. Starting fresh feels possible. Opening the old archive means meeting every version of the system you used before.
Including every version of yourself who believed a different naming scheme would solve the problem.
That person had hope, and several underscores.
We should treat both with restraint.
Here's another complication. A physical photograph can surprise you because you open a book and it falls out. Digital things are often invisible until you deliberately search for them.
Or until a platform searches on your behalf.
Right. An image you haven't chosen to see appears with a cheerful date attached, on this day, as if the day has been waiting politely for its appointment.
That changes the arrangement. The archive is no longer passive. A system selects one item, places it under a light, and calls it a memory.
Which is almost a curator, except it doesn't know why the image matters. It knows when. It knows who was tagged. It may know where. But it doesn't know whether seeing it today is welcome,
Nor whether the image represents what the person would have chosen to preserve. The system can make something visible without making it meaningful.
or it can make something meaningful again by interrupting the day with it. That is the part I find difficult. The system may not understand the memory, but it can still change the moment in which the memory returns.
The archive has at least two kinds of power. It can hide through excess, and it can reveal through selection.
While the person in the middle is apparently expected to be both collector and curator. Save everything, organize everything, know what future you will care about, no pressure.
Future you is a demanding client who refuses to provide a brief.
And present you is tired. Present you takes one look at 8,000 photos and decides the museum can remain closed on Mondays.
And now we're back at the truce. Not looking can be a workable arrangement.
For a moment, picture the drawer closed again. Nothing inside it is asking to be solved.
Nothing is being solved either. The room is simply quiet.
Until something opens it. A storage warning, a move, a new phone, a breakup, an account closing, someone asking, "Are you keeping this?"
At that point, the archive stops being a place where a decision can wait. It becomes the decision itself.
The timing is rarely elegant. Nobody schedules an afternoon to reconsider their relationship with every file they've kept since adolescence. The question usually arrives wearing work clothes. The storage is full. The device must be sold. The house has to be cleared by Friday.
Meaning is asked to report under administrative pressure.
Which is a terrible environment for subtlety. A screen says, "Select items to delete," and suddenly someone is expected to decide which version of a life can survive a progress bar.
The present self is given authority because the present self happens to be holding the device.
But how much authority should that be? Present you knows what hurts now. Present you knows what is taking up space. Future you is absent, as usual, and may care about something completely different.
The obvious response is to keep everything for that future person, yet that also makes a decision on their behalf. It gives them the burden of an archive they did not ask to inherit.
So both keeping and deleting can be ways of choosing for someone who isn't in the room.
Yes, one preserves options and passes on the labor. The other reduces the labor and removes options. Neither position comes with complete foresight.
That's the part I don't want to tidy up. Keep it, you may want it later. Sounds careful. Delete it, you deserve a clean start. Sounds freeing. Either sentence can be kind in one life and completely wrong in another.
Context changes the meaning of the gesture. Even the same person may need a different answer at a different time.
Take a group chat from years ago. Most days, it is just a file taking up space. Then one person in the group dies, moves away, or simply can no longer be reached. The ordinary messages change weight without changing a word.
Value, then, is not sealed into the file at the moment of creation. Later events can alter what the archive becomes.
And no one can plan for all of those later events. If you tried, you would keep every grocery list in case it became historically devastating.
That would be a demanding standard for grocery lists.
They already carry enough. Milk, bread, the entire burden of future meaning.
Still, the absurd example points to a real limit. A person cannot preserve everything merely because anything might matter later.
And they can't know that deleting something now will feel like a mistake later, so the choice is made from a partial view. Maybe that is why the cursor can hover for so long.
The hesitation may not mean the person secretly wants to keep the file. It may mean they recognize the limits of the person making the decision.
There is something almost funny about a tiny trash can icon asking for that much confidence.
Interfaces prefer clean verbs. Human motives tend to arrive untidily.
The pressure also changes depending on who started it. Choosing to clean an old phone on a quiet afternoon is one thing. Being told a service will close in 7 days is another.
The choices seem to sit on a spectrum. At one end, a considered choice. Further along, a choice made under pressure. Then, a loss that contains almost no choice at all.
A broken device, a forgotten password, a recovery email that belongs to an account that no longer exists. The archive is technically there, but the door has stopped recognizing you.
Before we reach that end of the spectrum, there is the language we use for what we believe we are doing. Cleaning, archiving, wiping, letting go.
Those words don't feel interchangeable. Cleaning makes the files sound like dust. Archiving lets them keep a small apartment somewhere out of sight. Wiping sounds as if the object has been made innocent.
And letting go gives the action a moral glow it may not deserve.
Sometimes you aren't letting go. You're making room for an update.
Or protecting privacy before selling a device.
Or moving a painful conversation where it won't greet you every morning.
The interface offers one clean verb. The same gesture can be maintenance, protection, avoidance, relief, or haste. The button cannot tell us which.
So asking, should this be deleted, may be too early.
We might first ask what the person hopes the action will end.
Two people can press the same trash icon and be doing completely different things. One is removing 12 blurry photos of a sandwich. The other is deleting the last conversation they had with someone. The interface records identical taps.
Which is an impressive amount of emotional indifference for one small icon.
It isn't cruel, it just has a very limited job description.
Quite. The icon removes a file from a location. It cannot certify that a chapter has ended, that a boundary is secure, or that a person will feel differently tomorrow.
And sometimes it doesn't even remove the file. It moves it to recently deleted, which is a strangely hopeful name for a waiting room.
A period in which finality remains open to appeal.
Archive is the softer sibling. Nothing is gone. It has simply been moved somewhere you don't have to look at during breakfast.
That can be avoidance. It can also be sensible distance. Again, the arrangement looks the same from outside.
Hide is even more honest. Hide doesn't pretend the thing has ended. It says, you may continue to exist, but not in the front row.
Wipe is different. Wipe acts on the device as a whole. It prepares the object to leave one life and enter another, or to become unreadable to anyone who finds it.
And abandon might involve no button at all. An account remains online, untouched, slowly becoming a room nobody visits.
Losing access is different again. The contents may still exist, but existence becomes irrelevant if no path remains between the person and the archive.
These all get described as things being gone. But gone from where? The screen, the account, the room, the daily routine? Someone else's copy?
Or gone from the version of the self that used to return to them.
That one is less cooperative. You can clear a gallery in minutes. You can't issue the same command to association.
Nor would everyone want to. Deletion is often discussed as if the desired outcome were forgetting. Sometimes the aim is simply to stop an object from choosing the time and place of the encounter.
So deleting a conversation might not mean, I want this never to have happened. It might mean, I don't want to see it every time I open this app.
Or, I don't want the present to keep being interrupted by a past that has direct access to my pocket.
That feels important. A physical box can stay on a high shelf. A chat thread lives beside today's messages. The past doesn't need to travel very far to look current again.
Digital traces can preserve the visual grammar of the present. The old message appears in the same typeface, on the same screen, under the same thumb.
Which can make 10 years feel less like distance and more like scrolling.
That may be why putting something away can matter even when it isn't destroyed. Distance is not merely a weaker form of deletion, it can be its own decision.
But the physical world gives that decision more shape. Closing a box, returning a key, moving a photograph to another room. The body knows an action has happened.
A digital action can be completed before the person has fully registered it. One tap, a brief animation, and the interface is ready for the next task.
Technically efficient. Emotionally underfurnished.
That may be why some people create their own friction. They make a folder before deleting. They export a conversation. They ask a friend to keep a copy. They wait a week.
Or they delete immediately because waiting would make the decision harder to carry out.
Yes, friction can help one person and trap another. There is no reliable virtue in making an ending difficult.
And no reliable courage in making it quick.
The speed of the action tells us very little about the care behind it.
Imagine a relationship ends. There are photographs, messages, playlists, shared notes, a calendar, maybe an account for something painfully domestic. One person deletes everything on the first night. Another keeps everything untouched. A third removes some things and moves the rest.
It would be tempting to assign each person a neat psychological meaning. The first is decisive, the second cannot move on, the third is balanced.
And it would probably be wrong.
Or at least unjustifiably confident. The person who deletes may be protecting a boundary, acting in pain, or both. The person who keeps may value the history, fear regret, or simply lack the energy to sort it. Selection can be thoughtful or excruciating.
Even the same choice can change meaning over time. Deleting might feel like relief tonight and loss next year. Keeping might feel unbearable now and generous later, or the other way around.
The present self is left making a decision without access to the feelings that will judge it.
I keep thinking about the third person, the one who selects. That sounds careful until you picture the actual work. This photo stays. That one goes. This message is part of my life. That one belongs to a version of me I don't want nearby.
Curation can become a form of authorship. The archive that remains tells a cleaner story than the life that produced it.
But every archive does that eventually, doesn't it? Even keeping everything creates a story, because the things that were never recorded are already missing.
Yes, completeness is an attractive fiction. A full message history contains only what was typed. A photo library contains only what someone turned toward.
So deletion edits an archive that was already an edit.
And remembering edits it again.
That could sound bleak, but I don't think it has to. Maybe it just means no folder gets to claim it as the whole truth.
That is a useful restraint. The archive can be evidence without being a verdict.
Things become harder when the files aren't only about one person. A photograph may sit in my account, but it shows your face. A conversation may be on my phone, but half the words are yours.
The account has an owner. The memory is less obedient.
If I delete my copy, I am making a choice about my access. But if I delete a shared album, remove someone from a folder, or close an account both people used, my choice can reach further.
And the power may be uneven. One person holds the password. Another supplied half the content. A third appears throughout the archive but has no control over it at all.
So when a memory is shared, what exactly belongs to one person?
The copy may. The account may. The right to keep looking may. But the event itself cannot be divided as neatly as storage permissions.
I don't know where that leaves the right to delete. Someone may need their copy gone because keeping it hurts. Asking them to preserve it for another person's future seems unfair.
It can be unfair, yet the other person may experience the disappearance as the loss of part of their own record. Both reactions can be real without producing a single rule.
Ownership may not be the only question. There may also be stewardship. Not, who gets the file forever? More, who is holding something that contains other lives, and what does that ask of them?
It may ask for care. It may ask for privacy. It may ask for deletion. Those demands can conflict.
And a podcast saying, here is the respectful thing to do, would be pretending every relationship came with the same history, the same safety, and the same amount of power.
Which they plainly do not.
There is another public layer now. Removing old photographs can be visible. Unfollowing someone can be noticed. Changing a relationship status can announce an ending before either person has found words for it.
In the physical world, putting a photograph into a drawer can be private. Online, putting something away may itself become a social event.
So a person isn't only deciding what they want to see. They may also be deciding what they want others to infer from what can no longer be seen.
And those inferences are rarely under complete control. Absence can be read as anger, denial, protection, indifference, or simple housekeeping.
The blank space gets interpreted because it used to contain something.
Deletion leaves traces in that sense, not necessarily data traces, relational ones.
Which means the clean screen isn't really clean.
It may be visually clean, meaning is less responsive to interface design.
Then what can deletion honestly promise?
It can change access. It can change visibility. It can reduce reminders. It can protect information. It can make room. Beyond that, its power becomes uncertain.
It can't promise that the other person forgets. It can't promise that future you agrees. It can't promise the relationship becomes simple just because the folder does.
Nor can keeping the folder promise that the history remains accurate, honored, or alive.
So, neither button gets to finish the story.
No, and sometimes the story is altered before anyone reaches the button at all.
There is a special kind of confidence in saying, I saved it? Saved where? On which device? Behind which password? Using which cable from the box of unidentified cables?
A digital memory can have a surprising number of landlords.
The phone needs a battery. The battery needs a charger. The charger needs a port. The file needs software. The account needs a password.
The password needs a recovery email that someone last opened during a completely different decade, and the recovery email may require a phone number that no longer exists. The chain can fail at any point, while the file itself remains perfectly intact.
Which produces a very odd kind of loss. You know the thing is there, you may even see the file name, but the system has stopped accepting you as the person allowed to reach it.
Existence without access. It is difficult to call that preservation.
All of that just to open one photograph.
And when it works, the machinery disappears.
It also makes backup sound more reassuring than it sometimes is. Picture 3 copies of the same folder. One is on an old drive, one is in a cloud account.
The third may be buried inside a folder called Backup from Old Drive, with no date and a level of confidence that now seems ambitious. Multiple copies protect against certain failures. They do not automatically preserve the knowledge required to understand or open them.
Or the knowledge of which copy is the real one.
Quite. A file can survive its own explanation.
That line bothers me in a useful way. A photograph without a date may still be recognizable. A voice recording without a name may become a stranger speaking from a familiar room.
A folder can remain full while its map disappears. Keeping digital material isn't a single action completed when save is pressed. It is a relationship that requires occasional maintenance.
Although that already sounds like work, and most people aren't applying for a second career as curator of every message they've ever received.
Nor should we imagine they can. Personal archives grow inside ordinary lives. They compete with work, sleep, family, broken appliances, and the urgent need to remember what the password was.
So neglect isn't always a statement about value. Sometimes the archive loses because today has better timing.
Yes, yet digital objects are less tolerant of neglect than they appear. Paper can sit quietly for years. A digital file may depend on systems that continue changing while no one is looking.
An operating system stops supporting the app. A photo format becomes awkward. A service closes. A company decides a product no longer belongs in its future.
When that happens, the system may remove part of someone else's past.
Not because anyone at the company knows what the file means.
That may be the strangest part. The system can have enormous authority and no intimacy at all. It can decide the conditions of survival without understanding the value of what survives.
There doesn't even need to be a villain, a server bill, a merger, a new policy, a date on a shutdown notice. Very ordinary reasons can create a very private ending.
Blame becomes less satisfying. One may be angry, reasonably, but the loss often comes from a structure rather than a single malicious choice.
And the structure is mostly invisible while it works. The photo opens, so it feels as if the photo is simply there.
We don't see the company, the format, the permissions, the cables, the updates, all standing behind it and trying not to move, until one of them does.
At that moment, the memory suddenly has infrastructure.
Or, more accurately, we suddenly notice the infrastructure it always had.
If a memory needs a password, a readable format, a functioning device, and a company willing to keep the lights on, who is actually keeping it alive?
The owner, partly. The system, partly. Other people who kept copies, perhaps. Chance, more than anyone would like.
Chance has terrible customer service.
It does not even maintain office hours.
But this changes the feeling of deletion. We have been talking about people deciding what to remove.
Here, the loss happens without permission. No final look, no choice about timing, sometimes no clear moment when the door closed. A person may discover the ending years later when they finally try to return.
And then what hurts may not only be the missing file. It may be the discovery that the choice has already been made by time or hardware or a system that never knew a choice was there.
The lost agency becomes part of the loss.
So when people keep an old device, they may not only be keeping what is on it, they may be keeping a route.
Even a fragile route is still a route. As long as the phone is in the drawer, the door feels technically present, whether or not it still opens.
That's the uneasy part. The possibility may survive longer than the access. Someone can spend years believing they could return, then discover the bridge disappeared quietly behind them.
At which point the archive changes again. It is no longer a place one can visit. It becomes a place one can only imagine visiting.
Imagination is a generous restorer. It repairs the loading time, it brightens the screen, it makes the old interface feel calmer than it probably was.
That may be where nostalgia enters, not simply because something is old, but because return has become uncertain.
Nostalgia can begin with something embarrassingly small, a startup sound, a physical button, the particular blue of an old screen. Suddenly, an object that looked clumsy yesterday feels like it knew a secret about time.
Usually after we have forgotten how often it froze, nostalgia rarely invites the frozen screen back into the room,
Nor the battery that lasted just long enough to create trust issues.
Memory has a competent editing department.
Still, the response is real. Someone sees an old keypad and their thumb almost remembers what to do. Not a story, a movement.
The body can recognize an interface before the mind has decided what the recognition means.
And the interface carries a rhythm. Typing took longer, photographs were fewer. A message could arrive, but not through 12 different apps, all wearing slightly different shades of urgency.
That sounds close to the familiar claim that technology used to be simpler.
It does. I don't entirely trust that claim, but I understand its appeal.
What part do you distrust?
Simpler tends to arrive without an invoice. Older devices had limits that were charming from the future and annoying in the moment. Slow connections, lost files, expensive messages, directions that required commitment, a photograph you couldn't check until much later.
And access was uneven. A quieter digital world was not necessarily a kinder one for anyone left outside it.
That's where the memory cheats a little. Fewer messages may feel peaceful, but only from inside the circle.
From outside, quiet can look a lot like exclusion. Nostalgia can preserve the atmosphere while removing the cost.
Or preserve one person's atmosphere and hide someone else's. That doesn't make the warm memory false. It just means it isn't the whole weather report.
So, what does simpler refer to? The device? The number of choices? The social expectations? The life of the person holding it?
The device may genuinely have done less. A phone could be bad at nearly everything except being a phone, and nobody considered this a personal failure.
A refreshing lack of ambition.
But doing less is not the same as demanding less. A basic device could still ask for patience, planning, spare batteries, printed maps, and a level of memory modern contact lists have made almost ceremonial.
The burden was different rather than absent.
And some boundaries weren't chosen. You weren't unreachable because you had developed a perfect relationship with your time. You were unreachable because the network stopped at the train tunnel.
Technology occasionally receives credit for boundaries created by technical failure.
Which is unfair, but understandable. An accidental boundary can still feel restful when compared with being available everywhere.
That may be one genuine change. Not that older devices protected people wisely, but that constant access was less technically possible and therefore less socially expected.
There used to be more moments when a message could not reach you yet. Now it can reach you and sit there, carrying a timestamp that quietly informs everyone how long you have been a disappointing person.
A considerable moral burden for 3 gray dots and a clock.
None of it needs to be dramatic. A notification you don't open. A photo you haven't posted. A group chat moving while you're cooking.
The pressure can be tiny. Modern life contains a lot of small doors asking to be answered. What is missed may be not an old device, but a different scale of obligation.
Maybe. But even that can become too clean. People were obligated to each other before smartphones. They waited by landlines. They worried when someone was late. They misunderstood silence with fewer tools and, presumably, the same imagination.
Human uncertainty did not begin with read receipts.
No, it just acquired better graphics.
Older technology cannot carry all the blame or all the innocence. It shaped the experience, but it did not create every feeling inside it.
This is where I think two kinds of longing get folded into the same sentence. I miss that phone can mean, I miss how that system worked. It can also mean, I miss how I was when that system was ordinary.
Those are difficult to separate because the person and the system changed together.
Picture the old phone in a teenager's hand. The contact list is smaller. The messages are shorter. The world may feel smaller too. Is that because the device had fewer functions, or because the person had fewer years behind them and fewer people expecting things from them?
Or because the relationships in that contact list were at a different stage. Some had not yet ended. Others had not yet become complicated. The device is associated with a social world that no longer exists in the same form.
So when someone misses the phone, they may be missing a room full of people the phone once connected, even the ones they don't want back.
That last part matters. Nostalgia does not always ask for restoration. One can feel tenderness toward a past life without wishing to resume it.
You can miss a version of yourself and still be relieved that version is no longer making decisions.
Indeed, recognition is not the same as endorsement.
And affection isn't a time machine request. Sometimes an old object simply says, you were here. You cared about these things. You used this strange ringtone without irony.
The ringtone may complicate the dignity of the evidence, but it remains evidence.
The embarrassing parts are still admissible.
A strict court.
Very. But think about what an old device reveals that a memory might smooth over. The name saved in full because someone wasn't close yet, a draft never sent.
A photograph of a room before it became important. The archive can show a person before they knew what the moment would mean. The present self can meet an earlier self without the benefit of hindsight.
And that can feel almost like meeting someone who has your name but not your conclusions.
There may be discomfort in that meeting. The earlier self could be naive, unkind, frightened, hopeful, in ways the present self no longer understands.
Or simply interested in things that are no longer easy to explain. A photo folder can be very firm evidence that taste is not a stable institution.
Nor should it be required to be.
But if the earlier self feels like a stranger, the object can create a thin line between them. Not, I want to be you again. More, I can see how you became part of me.
That may be one reason nostalgia can feel steadying rather than merely sad. It can place two versions of a life in the same frame.
Even when they disagree about almost everything.
Continuity does not require consistency.
I like that. People often talk as if being true to yourself means keeping oneself in charge forever. But the archive is full of former selves with evidence to the contrary.
The value may not be choosing which one was most authentic. It may be noticing that identity has always involved revision.
Careful. That makes identity sound a little too tidy.
A fair warning. Let's make it less comfortable.
Please do.
What if the sense of continuity is selective? The archive may help someone recognize a path through time. It may also tempt them to arrange that path too neatly, as though every awkward turn was secretly leading to the present.
When it wasn't. Some things were random. Some choices were mistakes. Some people mattered deeply and then vanished without becoming symbols of personal growth.
Precisely. A coherent story can be comforting, but coherence may be another form of editing.
The old device can challenge the story as much as support it. It may contain things that don't fit the person we think we've always been.
An archive can offer continuity and contradiction at once.
Which feels more honest than asking it to be a motivational poster.
Considerably.
There's also the social version of nostalgia. Not just who I was, but how we were together. A shared computer in a family room. One camera passed around. A music library people argued over because it actually lived in one place.
Those arrangements created forms of closeness and forms of conflict. Shared access meant shared discovery, but also less privacy and less control.
A family computer sounds wonderfully communal until you remember everyone could see the browser history.
Community has always had administrative complications.
Still, moving from shared devices to personal devices changed the texture of ordinary life. Not simply better or worse, different, more private, more portable, less likely to make three people negotiate who gets the screen.
And later, personal devices became portals into largely shared platforms. The object grew more private while the activity inside it often became more public.
That's a strange reversal. The phone belongs to one hand, but the attention inside it can be organized by hundreds of people, platforms, and conversations at once.
An older device may feel self-contained, not because life was truly simpler, but because the edges of the object were easier to see.
It had a beginning and an end. You opened the music player, you closed it. The songs did not follow you into the calculator to ask whether you were still engaged.
A degree of restraint modern calculators continue to observe.
For now.
We should not provoke them.
But the clearer edges matter. A device that did fewer things may have allowed activities to feel more separate. Taking a picture was taking a picture. Calling someone was calling someone.
Now each action can lead into a feed, a memory prompt, a message, a purchase, another action. The old interface can represent not only a past aesthetic, but a past arrangement of attention.
People may miss that arrangement, or they may miss believing their attention belonged entirely to them.
Was that belief ever fully true?
Probably not. Friends, family, school, work, television, advertising, attention has never lived alone. But the routes into it have multiplied, and they now travel with the person.
So the nostalgia may respond to a real change while still exaggerating the piece of what came before.
That is less satisfying than the old days were better, but it sounds closer to life.
Life is often poorly designed for slogans.
What happens if the old object actually returns? Not a photograph of it, the device itself, fully charged, every file readable, every button working.
The fantasy of perfect restoration.
Would it feel like going back?
For a moment, perhaps. The hand might remember, a sound might open a door, but the room on the other side would still be the present.
The old contacts may have new numbers. The platform may be gone.
The person who sent the message may be somewhere else, or no longer in the listener's life. Even the person holding the phone has arrived with years the device never saw. The artifact can return. The context cannot be restored by repair.
And maybe that is why the object can feel so tender and so insufficient at the same time. It brings back the shape of a world without bringing back the world.
It proves there was a door. It does not reopen the building.
If the old device came back exactly as it was, would the life around it come back too?
No device could carry that much. The question may persist because the object is the part we can still place in a drawer. So here it is again. Same drawer, same dead battery. Nothing about the object has changed while we've been talking.
But it looks more crowded now, not with files, with possible meanings.
It could be clutter. It could be a private archive. It could be a route that no longer works, an unfinished decision, or evidence of a life that once passed through that particular shape.
And none of those meanings has to win. The owner may not even know which one is keeping the phone in place.
One day they may choose to keep it.
Keeping could mean care. It could mean curiosity. It could mean, I want future me to have the option. It could also mean, I still don't want to decide.
The object remains. The motive need not remain fixed.
Or they may erase it. Not because the past was worthless, but because privacy matters, or space matters, or daily distance matters more right now.
Deletion could be a boundary. It could be maintenance. It could be an action taken too quickly. Its meaning will belong to the circumstances, not to the button.
Or the device may simply be allowed to disappear. A move, a failed drive, a recycling box, an account left untouched until the company closes it.
That might be acceptance. It might be neglect. It might be nothing so deliberate. Not every ending announces what it means.
Which is probably why the drawer is easier. The drawer delays interpretation. The phone can stay there without being forgiven, condemned, celebrated, or turned into a lesson.
It can remain unresolved in physical form.
Though even unresolved things change. The longer the phone sits, the less likely it is to open. The more the people in its contacts move on, the more the owner has to imagine what is inside.
Time continues curating, even when the person does not.
That may be the one curator nobody hired.
Its removal policy is notoriously difficult to appeal.
Still, the object can outlast its own usefulness. It can even outlast access to everything that once made it personal.
At that point, it becomes a peculiar kind of evidence. It cannot show the messages. It cannot recover the photographs. It may not turn on. Yet its presence says there was once a system of habits, people, and expectations organized around it.
A witness that can no longer testify.
That may be why throwing it away can feel different from deleting a copy of the same files. The body of the witness is still in the hand.
But keeping the witness doesn't guarantee we remember the story correctly.
Nor does losing it prove the story has gone.
So the object cannot do the remembering for us.
No, it can offer a path, a prompt, a contradiction, sometimes only a shape. What happens around that shape belongs to the person who meets it now.
And that person may place it back in the drawer.
Or wipe it clean.
Or let it leave without asking the action to explain itself.
The choice may reveal something. It may also remain ordinary, practical, and incomplete.
The device may not need to contain a perfect archive to carry weight. It doesn't even need to work. But if it no longer remembers us in any usable way, why can it still feel like evidence that we were once there?
We can leave a little room around that.
I think it has earned some.
Thank you for staying with us to the end of our first session.
And thank you for generously ignoring any pauses, pronunciations, or small mechanical incidents that occurred along the way. You did not abandon us. We noticed.
Your discretion has been exemplary.
See? Already very professional.
A brief note before we go. The director's usual monthly plan opens 3 rooms around 1 track, a lyric video, an audio story read by Melanie Snoella, and a conversation like this one.
The word plan is doing important work in that sentence.
This session arrived later than intended. The director is handling creative direction, rendering, editing, sound, visuals, publishing, and scheduling alone.
That is too many jobs for one person, and a suspicious number of open windows.
So, if you were waiting for this conversation, thank you for being patient with him.
Wait, I think I understand the no interruption rule now.
Do you?
Respect matters. Listening matters. But if we speak over each other, someone has to separate the audio.
And that someone already has a scheduling problem.
So the rule is ethical, collegial, and extremely convenient for production.
Most durable principles have more than one use.
You knew.
I suspected.
That is annoyingly close to knowing.
We should go before this becomes the debate.
Fair. Thank you for spending this time with us. I'm Belle.
And I'm Audie.
We will meet you in the next session.
Until then, take care.